The Indian Pot by Kit Williamson. As the stories in this collection detail, I am no stranger to the supernatural. While many don't seem to experience or recall supernatural experiences from their youth, I have never been so fortunate. This tale is one of my earliest recallings of my encounters with things outside of the natural realm. First, a little history as to the artifact this story centers around. In many Native American cultures, it is custom to shatter or break a hole in pottery in order to free the spirit of the bowl itself or the owner of said piece of craftsmanship. When I was little, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, my parents came into possession of one such artifact. From which culture it originated, I am unsure. The pot itself was about 1 foot tall and almost vase-shaped. It was cast from red clay with black chevrons adorning it in circles around the body. The singular thing that marked this pot from others of its kind was simply this: the pot was unmarred by cracks or holes. The pot always gave me an uncomfortable feeling whenever I looked at it, and I never liked being in the same room as it. My parents put it down as childish fantasy, as parents are wont to do, but in my heart, there was something terrifying about the thing. Usually this pot was kept in my parents' room, so none of us children had access to it, and therefore would not be able to cause harm to this antique. With the thing locked behind their door, I felt a modicum of security. After all, if I couldn't see it, it couldn't see me. Or so I thought. On rare occasions, my parents would leave some of us at the house, us being able to take care of ourselves and generally stay out of trouble. It was at these times when it was I, alone in the house, that the true terror of the pot revealed itself. The signs were subtle at first. I would be sitting on my own and feel suddenly as if I was no longer alone in the room. After much digging and searching to discover who else was in the house, armed only with a carved wooden sword, I was never able to discover the culprit. I tried to explain this to my parents, but was met with disbelief or congratulations on my creative imagination. As the months went on, each time I was left alone in the house, the presence grew, graduating from being a felt presence. I started to hear things around the house. Soft footsteps would pad down the hallway, and a faint booming would sound from my parents' room, as if from the distant pounding of some ancient drums. I became afraid to stay at the house on my own, terrified of the sounds, the feeling, and the presence. Still unable to convince my family of the nature of what I was experiencing, I was often kept awake at night, listening for the pad of quiet feet and the booming of the drums. It was during one of these terrible nights that I came up with an idea. I would dispose of the hated pot and rid myself of these waking nightmares. The problem was that when my parents were home, I would not be able to get to the vile thing, and when they were gone, the bedroom door remained locked. Such is the way things went, until the day that my parents informed me that one evening they would be late, and that I should behave myself for the hours that I was alone. I begged them to let me stay elsewhere during this time, but they couldn't make any arrangements at the time, and thus I was relegated to stay at home. So I sat alone in my bedroom, watching the television, waiting desperately for time to pass and dreading the sounds I knew would arrive. I didn't have to wait long. First began the drums, beginning as a low rumbling beat before they grew in intensity, causing the lights to rattle and the house to quake on its foundation. This time I was not greeted by the soft pad of footsteps, however. Instead, I sat up straight as the sound of a strangled scream erupted from the hallway. Frozen in terror, I stared at the door, fingers clutching at my wooden sword. Then arose the apparition. As I watched out my bedroom door, first a black blur formed inside the doorway, which quickly resolved into an almost human form. The indistinct shadow stood there, and I could feel its eyes upon me. In utter silence, it raised one arm, bringing it to point in my direction, before it began to move forward in a jittery pace, out of sync with the world surrounding it. I blinked once, and suddenly there it stood before me, legs spread out in a stance, that black hand pointing directly at me, almost touching me. The temperature around my bedroom had plummeted, and there I sat, shivering, while the shadowy phantom said not a word, just remaining there, pointing at me. With a shout of terror, I leapt from the bed, sliding painfully along the carpet just between the thing's legs. Arms and legs torn from the friction of my slide, I crawled my way out of the bedroom, and yet the shadow made no attempt to stop me, nor even attempted to move. Hastily, I jumped to my feet, sliding on the tiles of the hallway as I raced to rid myself of this horror. I slammed, stomach first, into the kitchen table, yelling out in pain and fear. It was at this time I looked up, stomach blazing with pain, to witness the phantom standing in the living room, arms still outstretched and pointing. I knew I had to escape, so I turned around, making a mad dash for the back door, but was again confronted by the apparition. Soundless, wordless, and faceless, it stood blocking my retreat, pointing at me. It was at this point that I started feeling something else. Malevolence and anger boiled from the creature, causing me to feel as if I would burst into flames from the sheer pressure of this emotion. With my exit blocked, I had only one chance. The front door might be unguarded, but in my heart, I knew that the thing could beat me there. It moved faster than thought, blinking in and out of existence as it deemed necessary. With another burst of adrenaline, I raced back to the living room and almost ran, face first, into the shadow as it stood blocking the front door. Gasping in pain and exhaustion, I altered my course, rushing towards my parents' room. It was only now, at this time, that I realized their door stood wide open for the first time since the pot had come into our home. I fell inside the room, hips slamming painfully off their dresser and collapsing to the floor. Looking around wildly for some chance at salvation, my hand fell onto the wooden sword. Somehow, I had kept it in my possession throughout the ordeal. There in front of me, I could now see the hated artifact which had become the bane of my existence. With a harsh scream, I brought the wooden blade up, swinging it like a baseball player and connecting with the red clay. With an inverted pop sound, the vase exploded into 1,000 pieces, scattering across the bed, the floor, and the rest of the room. Exhausted and injured, I leaned against the wall, slowly sliding to the floor where I quickly fell asleep. I was still in that position when my parents came home hours later. I was punished for not only the destruction of their treasured artifact, but also for lying to them and refusing to admit that I had picked the lock to their room. When they had left the house, they specifically remembered closing and locking the door and would not believe a word I said about what I had experienced. Over time, the memory of this event has faded some, but I have often thought about it. Oftentimes, I find myself wondering if, mayhaps, the spirit of the pot was not in fact trying to cause me harm, as my childish mind had so adamantly insisted. Looking back on it now, I find myself wondering if, perhaps, the shadow wasn't looking for blood, but for the sweet release of the afterlife, and a chance to finally be at peace.